I hated my best friend, Chaz. Yes, I know it sounds crazy, but that's how I really felt. We grew up as best friends and fierce rivals. We were more friends than rivals until we discovered girls. Thanks to some twisted sense of humor the gods must have had, it seemed like we always fell in love with the same girls. I think it started when we were in junior high. Chaz went to East High, and I went to North High. My name is Dill Edwards, and Chaz is Charles Theron. Dill sounds like a funny name, but my father won the money for my honeymoon with my mother playing poker. My real name is John Thomas Edwards, but because of my dad, everyone called me Dill. Chaz's father was from Bordeaux, and his mother was from Philadelphia. Chaz's father was a senior partner at one of the 8 largest accounting firms in Sedgwick County. Of course, they had money and a big house on College Hill in Wichita. I grew up on a small farm in Pleasant Valley, north of Big Ditch, not far from 37th Street. We weren't wealthy, and we had a small house. My mother was a homemaker, raising my 3 younger sisters and me. My father was a draftsman. Our families met because our mothers were on the board of directors of a large charitable organization, and they quickly became friends. My mother was on the board because her grandfather had left all his money to the charity on the condition that she remain a permanent member of the board. This led to us having joint barbecues, picnics, and dinners more often than I would have liked. Chaz and I were both athletes. At 6 feet tall, I was well-built and had excellent coordination. Chaz was about 6 feet 3 inches tall and lean, only 20 pounds heavier than me. He was a quarterback on the football team. I was a linebacker. I was a point guard on the basketball team, and Chaz was a forward, although he had the ball handling and shooting skills of a guard. We attended college together during our sophomore and junior years. I was dating a girl named Patty who went to Southeast High School. She was every high school senior's dream girl. She was hot before Chaz or I even knew what that word meant. We went out 4 or 5 times and were flirting lightly. I was head over heels in love with her. That year, both the East and North high schools had their proms on the same weekend. I was going to ask Patty to go to the North prom, but I waited until the last minute. I don't know why. When I finally made up my mind, she let me know that Chaz had already asked her. Damn. I didn't even know Chaz knew her. I was angry, but there was nothing I could do. A couple of weeks after prom, my family was invited to Chaz's parents' house for dinner. Chaz and I went to a park a couple of blocks from his house. It was the East High cross-country team's practice area, and we started shooting hoops. I won't go into details, but he told me he'd slept with Patty. Mad with rage, I swung wildly at him, but he dodged and caught me with a vicious short left jab to the chin that knocked me down like a man who had been kicked. He left me lying there and went back to his house. I showed up 20 minutes later with a menacing look on my face. We danced around each other for the next year. Sometimes we were friends, sometimes we hated each other. The following fall, during a football game at North High, we stopped being friends. Chaza had been invited to several Division I colleges, and he was leaning toward Oklahoma. I had already been accepted to Annapolis. Surprisingly, my grades played a major role in this, not my athletic ability. North High was ahead by a score of 30 seconds before the end of the game, but East had 4th down in the middle of the field. I was supposed to cover the receiver, but I shifted and moved toward the line of scrimmage. When their center snapped the ball, I lunged at the defender, remembering Patty. I gave it my all for Chaz when I saw him throw the ball 3 steps away from him. I still tackled him, knowing I was too late, but I didn't care. He fell on his throwing arm and broke both bones in his forearm. I was penalized for the late hit. But it didn't matter anymore. The pass was complete, and the game was over. It took Chaz 2 years to fully recover, and after that, he hated me. Because of his injury, he lost all his scholarship offers and ended up at Wichita State University. There, he had to study accounting and take a reserve officer training course. I left for Annapolis, and our families never got together again. After graduating, I joined the Marine Corps and went home when I was given a month's leave before being sent to Vietnam. I called one of the girls I had been dating on and off, and we went dancing in East Kellogg. I was outside smoking a cigarette when I saw Chaz. I nodded to him but didn't go over. He was in uniform with 2nd Lieutenant gold bars, a paratrooper badge, and the 82nd Airborne Division insignia. I was in my dress blue uniform and looked pretty cool. Chaz was there with a girl I hadn't seen before. She was tall, red-haired, wearing a white blouse and a black mini, or rather a micro skirt. She looked very hot. I heard several people call her Ruby. It would never have led to anything, but I overheard Chaz say something about Candy Marines. I guess he remembered how quickly he had put me in my place in the park all those years ago. Well, I've learned a thing or two since then. I humiliated him in front of his date, and while he was down, I asked Ruby to dance with me. I hadn't seen Chaz in years before that. Ruby and I started dating before I had to leave. I didn't see her that often, but I saw all there was to see. By the end of my leave, we were engaged. I thought I would go straight overseas, but I got a different assignment and ended up at the Foreign Language Institute in Monterey, where I started studying Vietnamese. Ruby flew out to see me, and we went to Reno, where we got married. She lived in Carmel. Her father was senior vice president at Boeing and gave her everything she wanted. It was great to have regular hugs whenever I had free time. Ruby was very sexy. It was natural for her, and she seemed insatiable, no matter how often we made love. If I had been older, I probably would have worried about her being alone when I was gone, but damn it, I was young and gave her everything she could handle. When I finished my training, she went back to her parents and I went to war. Khe San. For me, Vietnam marked an absolute difference and an absolute change in everything. In 2 days, I went from living in almost paradise in Monterey Bay and nights, sometimes, with a woman who exuded sexuality to this alien place. Everything was different. The air had a strange smell and the heat and humidity were oppressive. It was February 1968, and I was sent to the Khe San combat base a few miles south of the demilitarized zone in Quang Tri Province. The area was remote, sparsely populated, and the main hotbed of the war at the time. South of the demilitarized zone, a series of Marine and Vietnamese bases had been built to protect communications and population centers along the coast. I learned from my mother that Chaz was in the 503rd Airborne Division, operating in the Central Highlands at the time. My mother knew nothing about the hostility that had developed between us. Seeing him was the last thing I wanted to do, but I told my mother I would try to meet with him. I just didn't want to get her involved. The Khe San base had been closed the previous fall for renovation and expansion and reopened a few months before my arrival. South Vietnamese Army ARVN engineers built a dirt runway in 1962, which was doubled in length. And a couple of years later, several taxiways were added, built by Seabees, and covered with interconnected aluminum mats. By the time I arrived, it was a well-fortified base. As our helicopter approached the base, I had a premonition of things to come when we spotted the still-smoking remains of a KC-130 at the end of the runway. The base was more than 2 kilometers long and about 400 meters wide. The runway actually extended about 150 meters beyond the perimeter. This narrow passage was heavily covered by machine guns, Claymore mines, and several Ontos anti-tank vehicles. The only source of water for the base was a stream outside the northern perimeter. Water was pumped through pipes to the base and stored in rubber tanks. I was assigned to the S-2 Battalion, which was responsible for intelligence. My job was to translate documents found on captured or dead enemy soldiers as quickly as possible. This meant that instead of waiting for the documents to come to me, I often had to go and get them myself. It was hard work because the documents were usually in poor condition, and we were receiving more and more material from the NVA. What we had learned in Monterey was mainly from VC documents. About 2 weeks after I arrived, I was on the front line, and one of the guys asked if I wanted to take a picture with a snake. I asked what he was talking about, and he told me about a snake he had killed the day before. It took 4 men to bring it back. Later, when I returned to the real world, I looked at that photo and remembered what a hellish war it had been. It was a small consolation compared to the hell my life had become. I paid attention to soldiers with experience and learned how to survive. About 6 months after I started working in Khe Sanh, I was sent to Tan Son Nhut Air Base outside Saigon to meet with other translators to try to achieve greater consistency in our translations and suggestions for identifying trends in the data we had collected. It was believed that such a meeting would help us be more productive in the questions we were asking. On the way back, the helicopter I was flying in landed on the landing pad just as mortar fire began. I ran for cover as fast as I could when I felt a sharp pain in my back, followed by a deafening sound and a strong blast of air from the mortar shell explosion. At the hospital, I received bad news. The doctor called it a spinal cord transection in the epidural space. He meant that I was now paralyzed from the navel down. More specifically, I became impotent and began to suffer from incontinence, or more precisely, as the doctor said, urinary and fecal incontinence. I wish I had died. That was my first thought after the doctor left. It became an obsession. When I was receiving therapy and began talking to my fellow sufferers about how our lives had been destroyed by a war that no one supported, I learned to keep my thoughts to myself. It turned out that those who had suicidal thoughts were sent to some veterans' hospital and forgotten. I learned to smile and talk optimistically while coming up with plan after plan to escape the constant pain and humiliation I was experiencing. One of the plans started working almost immediately. One afternoon, I was dozing off. Actually, I slept most of the time because of the drugs I was taking for pain, when Chaz barged in. He had a bandage over his eye, which he had lost in an ambush by the Viet Cong. The stupid bastard actually looked even more handsome with the bandage than without it. We talked for a while, and then I begged him to bring me a bottle. "Come on, Chaz, for old time's sake." He came back and, handing me the bottle, said, "Hey, did Ruby tell you that we went dancing a couple of times when I was on leave before I left? You know, she was lonely. Listen, how are you going to satisfy her now?" Grinning, he added, "You know, you can always come to me for that, buddy. She's really hot, isn't she?" I was torn between drinking the bottle of whiskey he had brought me and throwing it at him in an attempt to poke out his other eye. I decided to drink it and tried my best to kill myself with it. I was almost halfway through the bottle when I dropped it. Not only did that prevent me from finishing the whiskey, but it also attracted the night nurse, who came running at the sound of the crash. With the amount of drugs I had taken, I almost died, but they did everything they could and saved my pathetic ass. I cried for 2 days straight after that, before I could fake calm again. Next thing I knew, I was in a hospital in Hawaii, and Ruby came to visit me for a couple of weeks. She would just come to the hospital for about half an hour every day. I asked her why she didn't come more often. "Because this place is too depressing, and I hate the smell. It makes me sick." I was worried about what she was doing the rest of the time, but there was nothing I could do about it. Finally, I made it home. We rented a house just a few blocks from Pleasant Valley High School, north of Wichita. It was on a large ravine. We hired a guy to install a wheelchair ramp so I could get in and out. Ruby didn't have the patience to deal with all the work involved in keeping me clean. From time to time, I noticed the disgust on her face, and it really hurt me. But the worst part was that she started going out 2 or 3 times a week in the evenings to meet her friends. Every morning, I had one prayer that I repeated over and over again. "Oh God, let me die today." The doctors said I probably had 2 or 3 years left. I had too much damage. I had to go to the Veterans Hospital about once every 2 months, and the doctors tried to fix something in me which delayed my death for a while longer. Ruby continued to go out in the evenings, leaving me with sleepless nights. I tried to talk to her about it, but all I got in response was, "Oh, Dill, I'm sorry, but it's so boring here. I'm too young to stay home all the time." I watched her get ready, and I knew she wasn't going to any damn bachelorette party. She spent too much time on her clothes and makeup, putting on some expensive slutty perfume that cost more than we could afford. She wore tight clothes that showed off her body. I thought more and more about trying to end it. I couldn't come up with anything until my buddy from Nama stopped by to see me on his way to Tulsa. We hung out for a while until I finally got serious. Listen, Ty. Man, I need a gun. Anything you can get your hands on will do. He looked at me intently, immediately realizing what I needed it for. Sure, Dill. I've got one in my car. He came back with a .38 police special and a box of ammunition. I didn't need the box. I had more than enough to load the gun once. One bullet would be enough to end my miserable life. This went on for a couple of months. I hid the gun in my travel bag in the closet. Ruby never showed any interest in it. Then the night came when I got angry enough. I was beside myself with rage. Ruby was leaving again and mentioned in passing, "I'm not driving tonight. Your old friend is picking me up for dinner and taking me dancing, and then we'll come back here." "Who do you mean? Who's picking you up?" "Oh, you'll see in a minute." I took her by the arm and asked, "Ruby, stay home tonight. Don't go out. Please, I'm begging you." "Stop it. I don't have much time. Just leave me alone." About 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Ruby went to answer it. Chaz walked in, wearing a new sports jacket and looking darkly handsome with an eye patch. "Chaz, what the hell are you doing here?" "Hi, Dill. You look great," he said with a smirk. "I'm taking Ruby to the dance because you can't even stand up straight, and you know how much she loves to dance. And then I'm going to give her something else you can't give her." He and Ruby both laughed. She took his arm, and they headed away. At the door, Ruby stopped and turned to me. "Remember, we'll be back here after our date." She emphasized the word date. "Please don't go into the bedroom. I don't want it to smell like those awful cigars you smoke. Oh, and if you want, you can watch us." Chaz added with a laugh, "Yeah, Dill, that's the closest you'll ever get to sex." I threw the ashtray at him, but he just dodged it, and they laughed as they walked out the door, slamming it behind them. Slowly burning up inside, I made my way to the closet and took out the gun. I always kept it loaded. Moving closer to the bed, I took out the bullets and wiped each one on the edge of the sheet, making the hard brass shine. I did this for 10 minutes until a tear fell on one of the bullets. Then I realized I was crying. At that moment, I knew I was ready to end it all. I had nothing to live for. I wanted nothing but death. I put the shiny death dealers back in the gun, one at a time. Then I looked down the barrel to make sure it was clean, though it didn't really matter. I tried to put the barrel in my mouth, but I chipped a tooth when I did. The pain distracted me, and I took it out and carefully wiped the saliva off the metal. Thinking about the best way to do it, I decided to go for the temple. I put the hard metal against my head and my finger on the trigger. I pulled it slowly, expecting a bang, but my hand shook and I backed away. Then I lit a stinking black cigar and lifted the pillow Ruby had been sleeping on, exhaling smoke into the hole in the pillowcase. I knew she would wash the pillowcase, but I hoped some unpleasant smell would remain. I stumbled into the kitchen. I needed Dutch courage, or in this case, Kentucky courage. My hands were still shaking as I poured water into a half-full whiskey glass, spilling more on the table than in the glass. Then I took a big gulp and choked, but it felt good. I put the gun back to my head, but I realized it was useless. I just couldn't pull the trigger. I couldn't do it like that. I added a couple of inches of whiskey to my glass and drank it slowly, thinking. The idea came to me in a flash of insight, and I understood, really understood, what I wanted from life. And death. I put the gun on my knees, covered it with a newspaper, leaned back, and began to slowly sip my drink, enjoying the taste. I took a clean ashtray out of the drawer and smoked all those stinking cigars one after another. For the first time in a long time, a smile appeared on my face. An outside observer would probably have called it a sick grimace, but at that moment I didn't understand the subtleties of facial expressions. I returned to the living room. Several hours passed slowly. I realized this when I saw how full my urine collection bag had become. I was pleasantly aroused and felt good. I had a plan. I smiled occasionally as I worked out each step in my mind. I took a couple of extension cords and cut off the ends of each wire. Yes, this should work. Finally, I made sure I had my phone handy. Now I was ready. It was around 11 when I heard a car pull up outside. Yes, I was damn ready for this. The door opened, and Ruby came in first, followed by Chaz. Her lipstick was smeared, and her blouse was sticking out from under her skirt. When she saw me sitting there, she screamed, "Damn you, Dill, I told you not to smoke those stinky cigars." Chaz closed the door behind him. I took the newspaper off my lap and raised the gun. My hand holding it was rock solid. I pointed it at Chaz. "Come here, right now." He looked at me and slowly moved forward. I forced him to turn away and kneel down. Obeying, he looked back as if he were about to say something. "Damn it, Chaz. I'm not going to kill you. Turn your head away." When he did, I hit him with the gun behind his right ear. Hard, but not too hard. I didn't want him to die. Then I did the same thing to Ruby. Next, I took the 4 pieces of wire I had prepared and carefully pierced them through the back of each of their knees, wrapping the cords tightly around each thigh like a tourniquet. I pierced their knees one at a time, carefully and deliberately. I definitely didn't want them to bleed to death. I cherished the hope that now they would both need wheelchairs for the rest of their lives. Maybe one of them could use mine to save some money. When I was done with them, I called the operator and called the police. "There's been a shooting at 411 Hayes Street. 2 people are injured. I don't know if the shooter is still in the house." I hung up and turned on all the lights. Then I opened the front door, drove up to the bedroom door, and waited with a slight smile on my face, knowing that this was the last time for me. I felt a sense of peace come over me that I had never experienced before. Just a few minutes later, I heard the sound of sirens approaching, followed by the screech of brakes. I heard someone slowly approach the front door, and then there was a sudden shout, "Jim, just look at this!" I heard a man running down the sidewalk as another car pulled up noisily in front of the house. I quietly squeezed through the door in my wheelchair and started shooting as fast as I could at the 2 police officers I could see, almost aiming at the ceiling. They fell to the floor and immediately started shooting back, and I felt a sharp jolt in my left shoulder. Then one of the policemen raised his gun, and a sudden flash blinded me. Wichita Eagle, December 17th, 1968. Jason Rose reports. Late last night, a man was killed by a hail of police bullets, and 2 people were seriously wounded in a house near Big Ditch in North Wichita. Police say they responded to an emergency call and found the door to the house open. When they entered, they came under fire and immediately returned fire. No police officers were injured and remained on duty while the shooting was investigated. A Wesley Hospital spokesman said the man and woman found were both injured and would likely lose their legs below the knees. In response to a follow-up question, it was made clear that the head of the surgical department expects both victims to spend the rest of their lives in wheelchairs. The names of the victims have not been released. Their next of kin are expected to be notified.